I'm Marwan Markanmaka, correspondent for the Nikkei Asian Review and former FCCT president. It's always nice to see a crowd filling up this space for events like this, even despite the inclement weather. The club needs your participation because given the political climate we are in, filling up the space is important to keep this place running. So if you have not joined the club, do sign up when you're leaving so that we can ensure we have a steady membership presence to keep the club going. Just a few announcements. We have regular documentaries on Monday, and we have one supported by the US Embassy next Monday. Then there's another documentary called Iris on July 3rd. A stalwart of the FCCT, Jeannie Halasey, who has done a film on the Rohingya in Burma. Her film was banned from being shown at an event in Burma. So we will be having a premiere of that event on July 5th. And finally, most of you who are residents of Thailand will easily recognize the names of Chris Baker and Pasuk Pongpai Chit. They have just been they've received an award in Japan for the extraordinary work they've done. And we will have a panel discussion on their book, Ayutthaya and the Writing of Thai History Today. That's on July 12th, so please make a note in your diaries. Today's event is a result of the rather dramatic and bloody events that have unfolded in the Philippines, and the suspicions among governments in the region and those of us who cover Southeast Asia on whether IS is going to gain a foothold in the region has now been proved true. This event was something that we decided to do to explain what's going on the ground, and we've got an impressive panel of 3 people who I will introduce. But first, I would like you to watch a clip of a BBC report that our colleague Jonathan Head did shortly after the rampage in Marawi.
This is Marawi today, a city abandoned by its people, a battleground.
This is as far as we can safely go in Marawi. The city centre is about 2 kilometres down in that direction. And all around here you can see the scars of battle on the buildings. The city the government thought it could retake in just 3 days is still not under their control nearly 2 weeks later. It's clear they've badly underestimated both the strength and the numbers of the insurgents.
And there are civilians who've been trapped in insurgent-held areas. This group has just escaped after hiding for 11 days. Most of them are Christians. The militants would have killed them. And Parola Sola is one of them. She has 6 young children. With little food to eat, they're now showing signs of malnutrition and need treatment in hospital.
There was one time at night we heard the fighters banging on the wall at the back of the building. My children were crying. The people we were with were getting angry. They were afraid that the militants would hear them. I didn't say anything to them, but my heart was aching. I could do nothing.
All these evacuees have stories to tell. This woman hid in a basement, listening to the gunmen walking above her. A mother who persuaded the Maute group not to take her 14-year-old son. A woman who lay in a bathtub with her children to protect them from the airstrikes. But the most inspiring story is that of the people who saved them. Noruddin Alonto Lukman is a respected Muslim community leader known to the Maute group who sheltered 71 Christians in his home and stopped the militants from finding them.
The second time they came back with a Maranao commander. He knows me personally. He knows my family.
But he's a member of the Maute group.
Of course, he's a ranking member of the Maute group. And from then on, nobody bothered me. Our only concern is the bombs falling near the houses and the firefights that took place near our house.
The army thinks it has Marawi encircled now. Checkpoints laboriously match ID cards to the wanted posters you see everywhere. But the Maute group has survived heavy losses before. Even after the Battle of Marawi is over, it could still strike again. Jonathan Head, BBC News, the Southern Philippines.
Okay. So two of our speakers are in Bangkok and one is going to speak to us via Skype from Indonesia. Let me first introduce you to Andy Bayuni, who will be speaking to us from Indonesia. He's a veteran journalist, editor of the Jakarta Post, who's been a regular at the club on a couple of occasions when we discuss Southeast Asian politics. Besides his journalism, he's also the member of the board of the Institute of Policy Analysis of Conflict, a Jakarta-based think tank. They have brought out some extraordinary reports on Islamic extremism, and two of their recent reports was how Southeast Asian and Bangladeshi extremism intersect, and the reemergence of Jemaah Islamiyah. Phil Haynes, the head of political risk and analysis of the Hong Kong-based ISS Risk, has his background in military, having served the British Army in Ireland, among other places. But since moving on from Ireland, he has been involved in risk analysis in Asia, a fairly impressive record covering Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, North Korea, the Philippines. He was also involved in providing security as a security consultant for the 2000 Olympics. And finally, we have Rungrevi Chalamsri Panyarat, who is a regular whenever we discuss southern Thailand, because she's been deeply involved, first as a reporter, then as an analyst for the International Crisis Group, and now as a student doing a PhD in Australia. She's regularly based there or in Australia whenever she's go back to her research. So let me invite the speakers onto the stage. Thanks. And Phil will set the evening going. Thanks.
Hello. Thanks for attending in this atrocious weather tonight. I'm just going to run through a sequence of slides, essentially to create a picture of what we perceive to be the evolving situation in Asia pertaining to the growth of ISIS over the past number of years. We'll point to some of the what we call combat indicators that have basically led to a conclusion that ISIS were embedding themselves in Asia over the past few years. Obviously, the events of Marawi have consolidated people's thinking in the past month or so as to what exactly is happening here in Southeast Asia particularly. This presentation will cover not just Southeast Asia, but I'll look briefly at South Asia, and we'll look at the connectors between the regions and the countries. So basically taking it from Marawi first. Oh, sorry. The initial incident that happened in Marawi within the first 24 hours of it kicking off was grossly misinterpreted and misunderstood as being a responsive terrorist incident to circumstances on the ground. And those circumstances on the ground were to do with the leader of the ASG faction, which is aligned to ISIS, Islam Hapalon. Islam Hapalon happened to be in Marawi at the time, and there was a AFP operation, joint operation between the police and the military to arrest him. A lot of people misinterpreted that action as being the catalyst for what has happened in Marawi since then to now. It just defies the logic that the preparation and planning that has clearly went into this operation to besiege the entire city was a responsive action by Islamist fundamentalists. The planning for this goes back months. The logistics, the supply chain, the setting up safe havens, the recruitment of the necessary forces, the combination of the groups involved. We have Motte Group, which was attributed as being the critical organisation behind it. We had ASG because of Islam Hapalon's connection. And even as of today, we've had another twist to the situation whereby we have now BIFF had launched an assault this morning at 0600 hours to take a city in Mindanao, or not a city but a town. But they launched somewhere between 200 to 300 fighters in that assault today, which has been allegedly repelled by the AFP, but they've taken hostages from a school in the town to use them as human shields. Now, given the circumstances in Marawi at the moment, this would indicate that this was a diversionary tactic to deflect military resources away from Marawi, to put them in pursuit of BIFF, and basically split the AFP's capabilities on the ground, which would then allow for fighters to escape from Marawi itself and potentially regroup. So really what we're pointing towards here is that the events in Marawi haven't been misinterpreted in the initial few days. It was a much more structured, organised event than people realised, and the authorisation or approval for that operation did come from Syria. Now, President Duterte claimed that without supporting evidence, but other evidence subsequent to what he has said has indicated that ISIS Central Command had a say in the deployment of these militants in the Philippines, which would indicate that their aspirations for a caliphate have somewhat more advanced than people were given recognition for. So you take the events of then to now and today. This is Islam Hapalon, the leader of the ASG faction. Now, relative to Islam Hapalon's position within the ISIS movement, it's actually, when we talk about ISIS in the Philippines, we're actually talking about a hodgepodge of different groups, which we'll come on to in a few minutes, who have given their pledges to ISIS over the past 2 to 3 years particularly. Islam Hapalon leads a faction which is essentially broken away from the main ASG group in terms of its ideological orientation and is much more Islamically fundamentally orientated than ASG itself. You take the Motte Brothers group as well. They've changed their orientation away from criminality over the past number of years. We take BIFF, which is one of the smaller groups in the region. Again, their orientation has ideologically shifted in the past couple of years. We have other smaller subsidiary organizations of these groups have now pledged allegiance to ISIS as well. But the origins of this go back 5 or 6 years to the creation of what they called the Black Flag movement at the time. Now, it hasn't been empirically or concretely proved that the Black Flag movement exists as an entity, but it certainly exists as a movement, as a force, an ideology. And the evidence now is clearly pointing towards the fact that these people, these organizations have actually come together and have combined their command, their control, their resources, logistics, and have aligned themselves with the ISIS ideology. So, again, at the time, everybody thought the attack itself was launched in response to the arrest for Hapalon, but the response for it was far too coordinated and structured. I mean, they broke 2 prisons. They basically liberated the prisoners from the 2 prisons. That doesn't happen without pre-planning. It takes human resources to do so. So if you had a couple of dozen bodyguards for Hapalon who were engaging with the AFP, suddenly backed up by a few dozen more members of Motte, then obviously the planning for the prison breaks was done in advance. So taking key objectives across the city, main transit routes, bridges, roads, buildings, that required human resources. Again, it had to be planned for. The fact that they've dug themselves in so deeply in the city and are still not 5 weeks later being dislodged means that their supply chains have been pretty consistent and solid, and they prepared for that in advance as well. One of the things we thought about in terms of the reason for this at this particular time was the Bangsamoro law that has been held up since Duterte came into power. and the negotiations have floundered. The entire peace process has been brought into question. They've suspended that peace process. At the same time, they've suspended the peace process with the NPA, which is National People's Army, which is a communist organisation. So we have two fronts there essentially at the moment in terms of the MNLF and the MNLF fighting for the Bangsamoro basic law and the autonomous region. You also have the MPA fighting for their objectives. Now we have a new front opened up, which is the Islamic Fundamentalist front. So the AFP is facing now an onslaught on three fronts. Okay, the MNLF have agreed to supply fighters to the AFP to assist in dislodging the Islamic fundamentalists from Marawi. But MLIF have not actually taken any actions as yet. And MLIF are a breakaway from MNLF, and the MLIF are more Islamic orientated than the MLF would be. It gets quite complicated with these acronyms for the organizations, but in reality there are three fronts at the moment in the southern Philippines, whereas 6 months ago we had a disparate group of Islamic fundamentalists who have now created a new consolidated front. So our critical observations of this was that Marawi incident should have been a wake-up call to governments, not just the Philippines, but to governments in Southeast Asia and further afield. ISIS does have objectives for this region, and this is clearly a manifestation of those objectives. It's a result of months of planning with clear, unambiguous objectives. MOTE as an organisation was grossly underestimated in terms of its numbers. There are a lot more foreign fighters in the country, which then you've got to question the intelligence capabilities and the will of the Philippine security services to actually tackle this problem head on. How did they miss so many foreign fighters getting into the country? Therefore, from that you can deduct that ISIS are far more advanced in their Southeast Asia aspirations than previously recognised. We use a comparison as Mindanao being the Fergana Valley of Southeast Asia. The Fergana Valley is a region in Central Asia which is a hodgepodge of different Islamic fundamentalist groups and other groups with different aspirations who have caused mayhem in particularly Central Asian region overlapping 5 countries for the past 20 years or more. So the Philippines unquestionably acts as an operational logistics hub for ISIS in Asia. It's been demonstrated without question in the past 5 weeks. If people need the proof, this is the proof. The time for prevarication and sitting with the fence or on the fence is past. So what we're looking at is a regionalisation of the ISIS threat, and we've been looking at this for several years and trying to point towards how the integration of these organisations has been happening, although it's different countries are involved, such as Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia. They all have a different purpose and function to serve within that regionalisation. Okay? So looking at Bangladesh, it acts as a bridgehead between South and Southeast Asia, which I'll explain more in a moment. Malaysia acts as a financial, logistical and support hub for Southeast Asia. Indonesia acts as an ideological and operational hub within Southeast Asia. Afghanistan still serves as a combat theatre. There's no question about that. So really, how advanced are ISIS aspirations for a virtual caliphate across the region? They're very apparent now. The reason for this is the caliphate in Syria is shrinking and has been shrinking since the Allied campaign against it, plus the Russian campaign and the Syrians. So as a part of that, we've seen a push out by ISIS in the past couple of years, but not to the extent that they really want to push out, because they haven't been ready for the push out. It's a systematic spread of their ideology. And we're witnessing a virtualization of the caliphate right now in the past year particularly. But it's certainly been in place for several years before that. I could go into a lengthy discussion about the waves of Islamification which have taken place in the past 40 years that have led to this situation we face now today with ISIS. So the draconian responses that they seek to garner from different governments and countries is precisely what they want. They want a draconian crackdown. If we look at London in the past few days, what happened there with an attack on Muslims leaving the mosque, that's a reaction from right wing in Europe against the Islamification that they perceive to be the threat to their country. And this is precisely what these people wish to achieve. They wish to pitch people against each other. So their strategy is much more holistic and thought out than is being given credit and recognition for, particularly by local, regional governments here in Asia. And I'm not just talking about Southeast Asia, I'm talking about South Asia and Central Asia. So we move on to talking about these affiliate groups in the Philippines before we go back to that quickly. This is just a list of the groups in the Philippines that have given their allegiance to ISIS since 2014. And you can see an acceleration through 2015 to 2016 of some of the major groups giving their allegiance. After BIFF did to, MOTE did to, then we had the creation of what we call IDE, then we had the subsidiary groups of that committing over the 2016 period. So when we talk about the regionalization of it, and we explain that the Philippines is an operational training hub for this. What's happened in Marawi endorses and supports that. Then we move on to Bangladesh. What's happening in Bangladesh has been pronounced for the past year, particularly since we had the Holy Ordistan cafe attack in Dhaka in July 2016, where they butchered 20 foreigners. But since that, this is a breakdown of attacks and incidents for the past few months just in Bangladesh. The security force response to the situation in Bangladesh displaced the terrorism across the country. Their focus has always been Dhaka to try and basically make a significant statement. But JMB as an organisation came under extreme pressure from the Bangladesh security services in the first 6 months after the Holy Ordistan Cafe, and they dispersed as a consequence of that across the country. Then we had a sequence of events from March of this year until now, which led to a series of takedowns of safe houses, cells, weapons finds, many attacks disrupted. But the number of suicide vests that have been recovered in Bangladesh in the past 6 months is around 44 suicide vests recovered. That's not detonated. We've had about 7 or 8 detonated as well. And I have all the stats to support this. If you compare those figures for the 12 months or the 18 months before that, it's a significant increase in terms of capabilities. The Holy Ordistan Cafe, they used knives. They used .22 AK rifles. They had no access to other high caliber weaponry. They had no access to other high quality explosives. That has changed in the past 12 months. The only reason why they haven't been able to execute what they're trying to execute is because security forces have taken down the networks. That's not going to last for much longer. The intelligence is drying up that they've been able to acquire in the past few months. It's a case of them being lucky. The security forces, I mean. These guys, yeah, they're ready to go. The intelligence is about to dry up. But Bangladesh acts as an important bridgehead between Central Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Then we take Indonesia, which I'll leave to an expert here, but I will talk about the role Indonesia plays within this. As we all know about Jemaah Islam as an organization over the past 2 decades, and how they were taken down because of their allegiance with ISIS, and their ability to operate was greatly inhibited by the Indonesian security services, particularly Densus 88, who did a terrific job and still do a terrific job in curtailing their activities. But the organization has clearly resurged. But it's not just a resurgence on its own. The attack that took place in Jakarta last year in January was a mess, and ISIS basically distanced themselves from it as much as they could because it was such a disaster. But on an ideological level, Indonesia serves a central hub for the spread of this ideology from ISIS. Its connection with the Philippines and with Malaysia is absolutely critical. We have Malaysia itself operating as a financial hub, a logistics hub, and a support hub. The concentration of Islamic banking in Malaysia is, again, a critical factor to the financing of operations. The support element within Malaysia, in terms of the planning of operations, the execution of operations, also a critical factor. India is becoming a new front. In the past 18 months, we have had up to 2,000 members of radical groups in Bangladesh, a lot of them from JMB, have actually made their way across into India, which coincides with the increase in weaponry coming back into Bangladesh. So the integration of Bangladeshi militants with Indian militants aligning with ISIS creates the opportunity for a new front. ISIS in Kashmir have declared their intentions to use Kashmir as a springboard for across India. So you connect India with Bangladesh in terms of the activity happening. It's a matter of time before that connection actually is established. And then we have Afghanistan as a training and operational center for what's happening. when I say operational, it's been operational since the US invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11, and it remains so. Even in March of this year, when we had the Moab bomb dropped in Afghanistan, the most telling thing about that bomb that day for me was the number of foreign fighters that were killed in that tunnel network. And that was a tunnel network that was actually handed over to ISIS from the Taliban through cooperation and liaison. But they killed they estimate over 90 fighters died in that bombing, of which 12 different countries have been identified as being represented so far. So it reinforces again the cross-fertilization on a regional basis of how these organizations and groups are operating. I only have a few minutes here, so essentially what I want to do is just wrap up basically talking about the cross-fertilization, the interconnectivity of country to country and region to region, and how ISIS are spreading their ideology and have been systematically in a structured way, which we're only beginning to see the emergence of the developments that they have been put in place for the last 4 to 5 years. What's happened now this year so far is an endorsement of the position we have taken that this is happening and will continue to happen. And even today, what's happened in the Philippines with the second attack on a second town indicates that this organization is not being suppressed in the Philippines, and the Philippines will be a major operational hub for them. And these other countries and the connection between them relative to what ISIS are planning, they all have a role to play. So I'm just trying to get people to think along the broader ramifications of what's happening here.
Thank you, Phil. Excellent. We will now go to Andy in Indonesia. He will be talking to us via Skype. Andy, are you there? Can you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good evening to you all. It's my pleasure to be talking this conference. I wish I was in Bangkok, but this is the beauty of technology. Just one thing that I need to clarify when Marwa introduced me also as someone who's sitting on the board of Institute of Policy Analysis for Conflicts. I am on the board, but I'm not actually involved in the work, in the research.
Okay.
They do a great work, led by Sydney Jones. I'm sure everybody knows. She has been the lead investigator on terrorism in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. She should be here, not me, but I think she was not available, and then Marwan decided to contact me if I can actually speak on this topic. And I also want to thank Phil Hines for the presentation, very clear. And I'd like to hear more about his take on the Indonesian terrorist movement. Because I have a slightly different take. Mine is, again, is based mostly on my own reading of the news that are coming out in the Philippines and in Indonesia, and of course out of Syria. But I'm not a researcher per se, so my presentation will be kind of more general rather than specific about what is happening with regard to the fight against ISIS in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. First of all, I just want to alert you to the news that has just come out of Manila this evening, that President Duterte has given the green light. I'm not sure the green light will be, is inviting Indonesian troops to join in the fight to crush the ISIS movement in the Philippines. I understand that the foreign ministers of the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia are meeting in the Philippines to discuss about the next steps. And I presume that announcement from President Duterte came out from that conference. Anyway, I'm not sure whether the idea of Indonesia joining in a military operation in another country is something that Indonesia wants to engage, because we have problems on our own territory. And therefore, and as I believe that for Indonesia to join in a military operation abroad, it has to have the approval of the parliament, which could take some time. So it's a nice gesture, but I think the idea of joining forces is probably not going to happen anytime soon. What we actually have now is a joint patrol You have seen the reports coming out in the past few weeks. I recall a few months ago when they were talking about joint coordinated patrol in the Sulu Sea. So meaning that each country, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia, the military will protect their own areas, but they will not trespass to another country, because that would mean would raise questions about sovereignty. But I noticed that they changed the wording. In the past, they were talking about coordinated, but now they're actually talking about joint patrols in the Sulu Sea. So that's probably a development and a reflection of how this problem of the ISIS threat is taken more seriously now. Of course, after the attack of the Marawi city. Let me just talk a little bit about the ISIS threat in Indonesia, how it is being perceived, before I talk more about the latest development in Marawi city. Of course, what happened in Marawi city came as a shock to everybody. But like Phil Hines said, it's already been predicted. It's just a question of when it was going to happen. But it's also raised questions, again, Phil raised questions about the intelligence capability of the Philippines. Something like this, takes a lot of planning, logistics, and movement of the fighters. And the question is, what happened to the Philippines intelligence? They should have, should have been able to monitor this movement, but somehow I think they and we all were taken by surprise. And it also raised questions about, I think the capability of the Philippines to fight the threat of ISIS. Because if anything, I think the ISIS base should be in Indonesia rather than in the Philippines. Indonesia has a larger Muslim population, and we have more islands in the Philippines. But I can tell you that they tried to set up base in Indonesia because we have this person, the name is Santoso. He is the leader of the ISIS movement in Indonesia. He had been in the run. There was a massive manhunt for him in Sulawesi, where he was hiding, starting in October, and lasted for more than 6 months before he was eventually killed. So Central Sulawesi is a very unstable region. They have had history of conflicts between Muslims and Christians, and this is where I think many of the terrorist groups in Indonesia, not necessarily ISIS, but even like Jemaah Islamiyah and the splinter groups, they operate there freely because of the situation there. But I think the Indonesian military and the police launched the massive manhunt against Santoso, and it took them months, 6 months actually, before they succeeded. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think the Indonesian military and the police capability in countering the terrorist threats have been wonderful, I would say. And I think Phil also mentioned this earlier in his presentation. Well, this thanks to the building of the capacity after the Bali bombing in 2002. I think the intelligence capability of the Indonesian police in particular have been beefed up, and they have been able to anticipate or even foil planned attacks by various terrorist groups, Jemaah Islamiyah and these splinter groups after that. But the threat of terrorism will always be in Indonesia. Just a question of the different levels of the threats. We have had people with aspiration to turn Indonesia into Islamic State. We had this since independence in 1945, and but some of them would fight the battles through the political process. They set up political parties and contest the elections. They will win few seats, some seats, but they never win a majority. But some decided to go underground, and these are what we call the homegrown terrorist groups. And they have been around. They would go underground and they would launch attacks now from time to time. And they are not affiliated per se with Al Qaeda because they actually they had existed even before Al Qaeda came into existence. But they became affiliated or they pledged allegiance because they would give them access to money and ammunition. Same thing with ISIS. Many groups, like as in the Philippines, they pledge allegiance to ISIS because they think this is a good idea, but they're not necessarily following the ISIS ideology. What I can say is this: ISIS is not popular among Indonesians. We can look at the figure. The number of people who actually went to Syria and joined ISIS, they are, according to the police, not more than 1,000 people. And of the 1,000 people, actually half of them are women and children. They join the father or the husband to go and try to set up a new life in a real Islamic country. They believe. So they went there. So the real fighters from Indonesia that have gone to Syria is about 500 people, and that's quite small for a country where we have about 220 million Muslim population. You compare it to the figure. I think Europe, proportionally, they have far more jihadis going to Syria than Indonesia. And the reason is because I think although many people share the idea of an Islamic caliphate, they don't share the idea of using violence. And even many of the terrorist groups in Indonesia, they don't share the idea of killing civilians and killing fellow Muslims, because ISIS, as everybody knows, they would not hesitate to kill fellow Muslims if these Muslims do not share in their ideology. This is well known in Indonesia. Many people who have gone to Syria, they were attracted by the YouTube propaganda, but people also saw what is happening in Syria and the killing of fellow Muslims. They said, well, this is not for me. And I think ISIS is not popular. But of course, I would not minimize the danger, because they're deadly. And I think what is happening in the Marawi city is a warning that of what they are capable of doing in the Philippines, but not so much in Indonesia at this stage. The terrorists in Indonesia, those affiliated to Jemaah Islamiyah, they have a different style. And I think many of the recent attacks, terrorist attacks in Indonesia, reflect more the style of the Jemaah Islamiyah rather than ISIS. And they attack police officers. The attack that we had in Jakarta 2 weeks ago, the suicide bombers, they were actually trying to kill police officers. And yes, and I think 1 or 2 police officers were killed. Even the big attack, well, not big, but the attack in Jakarta in January last year, they were targeting police officers, not civilians. And again, that's a reflection that they may, ISIS of course claim that this is part of ISIS operation, and 1 or 2 of the perpetrators who were killed in that attack have been known to have stated they are part of ISIS. But the style is not ISIS, because they were attacking police officers. And many of there have been smaller attacks in Indonesia in the past year, and they were all lone wolves, right? One person trying to, they could be affiliated to ISIS, or they could be affected by the ISIS propaganda, and they decided to try, to be part of that campaign. But like I said, we should not minimize the ISIS threat. As I think what's happening in Marawi city is a reminder, at least for Indonesia, is the enemy is already at the gate. In the Philippines, it's already within the Philippines. And I'm glad to see that now the Indonesian government is taking this seriously. It's actually coordinating with the Philippine governments and the Malaysian governments to intensify the patrol in the Sulawesi Sea. The question is how many people are actually affiliated to ISIS? Nobody knows. I mean, the only figure that we have is that 1,000 people who left and joined ISIS, and then some of them were killed already, and one or two, or some of them have returned, not necessarily because they returned to start the ISIS campaign in Indonesia. Some of them returned and they were interviewed by the police, and they said these are the ones who brought their families with them, and they said the reason why they came back is because it's not ISIS is not what they promised to be in what they saw on YouTube. Live like a real Muslims in a real Muslim country, and they also complain about the treatment, different treatment, discriminatory treatment that they were getting compared to the fighters that were coming from Europe, and they decided this is not for them, and they returned. Some of them returned to start the ISIS campaign here, and I believe also because since ISIS is losing territory in Syria, there was this instruction for all ISIS supporters or members around the world for them stop going to Syria because there's no point in going there, and then if you are, but you should start fighting your battles in your own country. There was this specific instruction, and there's also instruction for those ISIS fighters who are leaving Syria and returning to their countries to start the campaign in their countries. I guess this is where the Marawi city is part of that picture. Just to conclude with my short presentation, the ISIS problem or threat is here, is real. We should not underestimate it, but I don't think we should overstate that. The real problem in Indonesia, ISIS is a problem more for the military and the police to deal with because they take up arms. The real problem in Indonesia is ideology, as Phil mentioned, the ideology, the idea of an Islamic State or caliphate. Many of them, they came from Indonesian Islamic leaders. And the battle, I think, in Indonesia and in the Philippines and in Malaysia, eventually is more an ideological battle to stop people from converting into the idea of supporting the caliphate or Islamic State in Asia or in their own countries. And I think that's where more of the resources should be dedicated fighting, because they are fighting at the grassroots. They're trying to spread the ideology, but not necessarily by mentioning ISIS. Like I said, ISIS is not popular. But if they're appealing to people, say, look, you want to live like real Muslim, and then you should support this idea. I think that's really the message that I want to convey in this conference. ISIS is a real problem. We have to deal with that. But in the long run, I think we also have to deal with the threat that is coming through the ideological battle.
Thank you, Wendy. Much appreciated. And the question has always been asked, given the presence of ISIS in Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, is it also lurking in the Deep South? And that question, hopefully, will be answered by Rung Ravi, who is our third speaker for the evening. Please.
Thank you, Marwan. When Marwan, my old friends, contacted me and asking me to join this panel, I told him that my question is very short. My take is that there is no evidence that the ISIS has operated in southern Thailand, and there's no evidence of any operational links between ISIS and the Malay Muslim liberation movement in southern Thailand. As you see when Paul present his slide, there's no Thailand in the pictures. So there's no evidence that found so far. Maybe something is going on underground, but it hasn't really emerged, and there's no solid evidence to back that up. So today, I would like to talk about two things. I will explain on the ISIS issue, and I also would like to draw your attention to the peace process in southern Thailand, as I believe that the negotiation for a political settlement is the best way to resolve the conflict there. With the growing threat of ISIS in the neighboring countries, as you see in the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, it is understandable that people begin to worry about whether ISIS might have also extended its influence to the predominantly Muslim area in Thailand. In early May, a Malaysian police told local media in Malaysia that they arrested two ISIS members in the northern state of Kelantan, and the third man evaded arrest and escaped into southern Thailand with some weapons. The Malaysian police also add that these people were believed to have smuggled weapons from southern Thailand for ISIS. The Thai authority expectedly denied such report and said that the investigation by security force had not found any presence of ISIS in Thailand. This renewed concern over the possible linkage between global jihadists and the local movement has reminded me of the situation in 2004, when the violence in southern Thailand surged dramatically. A key question that analysts tried to answer at the time was whether or not, or to what extent, the surge of violence has to do with the global jihadism. During that time, Jemaah Islamiyah had a strong base in Indonesia, and JI at the time also carried out operations in Malaysia and also fought some linkages with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, in Mindanao. Some so-called terrorism experts try to look for a similar linkages in southern Thailand, but there was no solid evidence to back up this claim. A lot of information cited in this work came from intelligence report, which contained a great deal of unfounded facts. As time went by, I think it is fair to say that there is a general consensus among analysts and observers of the conflict in southern Thailand that this conflict remains to be a homegrown insurgency. And based on my recent interviews with the BRN, the Patani Malay National Liberation Front, the group with the strongest military capability on the ground, the BRN admitted that outside groups, including JI, has approached them to offer assistance. But the BRN stand is clear. They have no willingness to form any linkages with this group because, first, there are differences in terms of ideology. The BRN remains a local armed movement, and its objective is to wage a jihad to regain its homeland from the so-called Siamese colonialists, and to build a just society based on Islamic principles. As far as I'm concerned, a criteria to become a BRN member is that one needs to be a Malay Muslim from Patani. That means the area known today as Patani, Yala, Narathiwat, and some part of Songkhla. Second, the BRN is operating with strict discipline and high confidentiality, and they do not want any outside group to infiltrate into and have influence over the movement. Having said this, I do not completely rule out the possibility for ISIS to enter southern Thailand. As the conflict drags on, there is a higher tendency that the situation will become more complicated, and other elements might try to tap into the volatile situation. Now I would like to move to talk about the peace process in southern Thailand, as this is potentially a platform where a permanent solution and a sustainable solution can be found. In April this year, the BRN issue an important statement. This is from the BRN's Information Department. They issue a statement expressing the willingness to hold a peace dialogue with the Thai government if its conditions are met. These are the three conditions. The most important issues that the BRN is asking is that they want the international observers to be involved in this peace process. The question is, do we have to pay attention to this statement? Does it matter for conflict resolution in southern Thailand? What is the relationship between this group that's speaking on behalf of the BRN Information Department and Marawi, the umbrella group that currently engaged in the peace dialogue with the Thai government? Before answering this question, I would like to give a brief background for those who may not be familiar with the situation in southern Thailand. The Thai state has never held any formal peace dialogue with the insurgent until 2013, 9 years after the resurgence of the violence. The formal peace dialogue was initiated under the government of Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, and it was the first time that an international actor's Malaysian government was allowed to be involved as a facilitator. The Thai state, particularly the military, has shunned international involvement, fearing the conflict could become internationalized and open the way for secession. During the Yingluck government, the BRN representative made 5 demands to the government. It called on Bangkok to first allow Malaysian government to play a mediator and not just facilitator role. Second, ensure that the dialogue be held between the Patani people led by the BRN and the Thai government. Third, allow ASEAN, OIC, and NGOs to witness the peace processes. Fourth, recognize the sovereign rights of the Patani Malay over Patani land. And the fifth, release all the prisoner in security-related cases without conditions and revoke all arrest warrant. The talk unfortunately made no headway, and Yingluck was forced to step down amidst growing anti-government protests in Bangkok. So now, the post-coup government decision not to completely abandon the peace dialogue came as a surprise, given that the military expressed strong opposition against the Yingluck government initiative. This time around, the BRL leadership decided not to get involved. However, some BRN members acting on their personal capacity joined 4 other liberation groups as shown here, BIPP, GMIP, Pulo MKP, Pulo DSPP, to form a new umbrella group called Marawi Marawi Council, Consultative Council, sorry. This group have a relatively very small armed groups comparing to the BRN. The biggest question for the Thai government is, does Marawi have command and control over the militants on the ground? Based on my interviews with Marawi sources, they are confident that there are certain areas that they could communicate and control the fighters on the ground. But it appears that this might be limited to the area where the BRN inside Marawi used to operate militarily and still maintain that influence. Going back to the latest statement by the BRN Information Department, which I mentioned earlier, that statement is indeed a major challenge to Marawi. The statement was issued in the middle of 2 coordinated attacks across provinces on April the 6th and the 7th, and on April 19. It was meant to demonstrate the BRN command and control over the fighter on the ground, and to show that they are the real partner with whom the Thai government need to negotiate. But this would only happen under the BRN's own terms. The BRN Information Department raised a higher bar than Marapatani, as it hoped that the involvement of international actors could help guarantee that the peace dialogue would be a genuine negotiation platform. To conclude, I would like to raise 3 points. First, the formal peace dialogue has significantly shifted the battleground from the military to political terrain and pushed the clandestine BRN to emerge from underground, although most of its operation remains highly secretive. This could influence the BRN behavior and future moves. The sustained engagement in the peace process could encourage moderation in the long run. Secondly, neither Marapatani nor the BRN Information Department rejected the peace process in principle. So this is the platform that could potentially bring the armed conflict to a permanent end and reduce the chance of outside groups such as the ISIS to tap into the volatile situation. Last, if the peace dialogue is to be a meaningful process, the Thai government will need to have a genuine willingness to explore a political settlement and ready to make political concessions, particularly on the issue of devolution of power. Thank you.
Thank you, Rangravi. Okay, so we now open the floor for questions. There is a mic at the back of the room. We invite any member of the audience to come up there, introduce yourself, any affiliation, and please, proceed with the questions. Tony, go ahead.
Hello. Is this on?
It's on, it's on.
It's on, okay. Tony Davis, I write for IHS Janes. I have a question for Phil, which is a pretty simple question. Why, given what you presented as this connectivity between what you called IS Central in Syria and Iraq and the Philippines, why has IS Central not declared a wilayat or a province in the southern Philippines or in Southeast Asia on the back of what's happened in Marawi?
Simple question, simple answer. I don't know why they haven't declared it, but there's clearly a connection between the spread of the ideology and the designs that the local Philippine militants have to connect themselves. Well, when ISIS are ready to make that declaration, that's down to them. It could be a strategic position on their part not to declare it. Maybe they don't want to give their hand away. Maybe they've got bigger plans in play by starting to acknowledge the existence of different wilayats. Then they could be overplaying their hand. We'll have to wait and see. But frankly, that's a good question. But why would they not do it? Strategy, gameplay.
Next question.
John Forcier, currently
Could you get up to the mic, because Andy is also listening to you in Indonesia. We just want to make sure you can.
John Forcier, currently unaffiliated. Question for Phil. You mentioned the modus operandi of the groups in the southern Philippines having changed from one of criminality to one of more of an ideological pursuit. I'm assuming that the acquisition of funds through criminal enterprises has probably dried up. You also mentioned the financial hub in Malaysia. Where's the money coming from?
Well, we don't know if the finances have dried up in the Philippines because some of these organizations are still executing criminality. For example, MPA, MLAF and whatnot, they use organized crime to finance themselves and fund themselves. So when it comes to these smaller organizations, yeah, they use organized crime and criminality to finance themselves. But we haven't said it's dried up. What we have said is that there's been an expansion of the ideology. Where's the money come from? Have ISIS as an organization over the past number of years siphoned off finances to support and sustain a consistent terrorist campaign for whatever length of time? Probably. Well, if I was an organizational commander at that level, with the kind of access to resources and finances they had for a number of years undisrupted, even siphoning off 2 or 3% of that you could sustain a terrorist campaign globally for quite some time. Al-Qaeda managed on a budget probably less than what ISIS have had at their disposal.
Thank you.
Nigel Gould-Davis from Mahidol University International College. So I wanted to take up this point about the aspiration to establish a caliphate, or the beginnings of a caliphate. And let's recall what's happened in the Middle East. So it was only after a decade of really brutal conflict in Iraq and several years of civil war within Syria that created the conditions for the ISIS caliphate there. And that is now suffering significant military setbacks. It's very possible that in a year or two, the ISIS caliphate that currently exists will no longer exist. Here in Southeast Asia, it seems that they are aspiring to create something caliphate-like in a situation where we don't have the desolation of war and civil war. We have functioning states, imperfect perhaps, but certainly states capable of effective and concerted action. So is there anything to the aspiration? In any sense, is it realistic for these forces to try to establish something like that here? And to ask Andy specifically about his very interesting point on the primacy of the ideological conflict or trouble here. Do you feel that the events that recently we've seen in the Philippines make it more likely or less likely that the wider Muslim population in the region will be attracted to the idea of a caliphate?
Well, first of all, I would say that the creation of the caliphate isn't something that's happened in the time frame that people perceive it to have happened. The foundations for the creation of the caliphate were laid quite some time before that. You can actually trace the origins of ISIS back as far as 2003 to 2004 in its embryonic stage and state. But again, that's part of something broader in terms of the waves of Islamic fundamentalism in the past 40 years that have continuously created conditions that have been exploited by ISIS. But the build-up to that has been, like I say, 40 years in existence. You can trace it back to the occupation of Afghanistan. What we're talking about here is the embedding of an ideology, reference to the Philippines and whether or not what's happened in the Philippines is a catalyst, is it a rallying call, is it an inspirational act? Yeah, it's all of those. Is it going to actually create the objective of a physical caliphate in the country? Probably not likely. They probably can't hold the ground that they would need to hold. But it's not about the physical aspect of it. It's about the spread of the ideology. It's about the appeal of it. It's about the long war, basically, is what we're talking about here. And they're trying to attract supporters. They're trying to attract volunteers. They're trying to attract fighters. They'll have a continuous supply of that for the next decade at least, until the root causes of this radicalization is actually addressed. And even then, will they be able to address it? I don't know. It would take a greater mind than mine to do that, that's for sure. But in answer to your question, I think it's a rallying call. It's an inspirational act in the Philippines. But it could be the same inspirational act in any of these countries, in Malaysia, Indonesia, Bangladesh. They don't actually have to take and hold the land. But what they do is they embed the ideology and it gains traction. And that's what their objective is here, from my perspective.
Andy, do you want to respond? Because that was also addressed to you.
Yeah. First of all, I think the idea of caliphate is the aspiration for caliphate is quite high in Indonesia. Well, not high, but the aspiration for Islamic State in Indonesia is pretty high. Not majority, but I think many Muslims feel that as Indonesia is the largest country with the largest Muslim population, it should be the Islamic State. We had this debate since Indonesia became independence, but I think people became realistic that if Indonesia is an Islamic State, it would be considerably small because some islands would not be part of Indonesia. Bali would be separated for sure immediately. So aspiration for Islamic State is there, but aspiration for caliphate that's something else. And I don't think the idea of caliphate clicks in the minds of many Indonesians. Of course, there are the few diehards, ideologues. They believe in the caliphate, believe that the whole of Southeast Asia, even Australia, should be under the caliphate in Southeast Asia. But aspirations is something that you cannot kill. So Suharto thought he could kill the aspirations of the Islamic State, but all he did was just send these people underground, and they are much more dangerous. Now Indonesia is a democracy, and you can campaign for Islamic State in elections, and I see actually one or two political parties have that stated in their platform, that their goal is to turn Indonesia into Islamic State, even knowing that they're not going to win the elections. But they know they're going to win some votes, because there are people who believe that they should vote for Islamic parties with those platforms. But these are the people who are visible, and we know who they are, and they are fighting their battles through peaceful means. And I think they're legitimate in a democracy. The ones that decided to go underground and then launch terrorism or go into rebellions, those are problems of law enforcement and military. Your question whether what's happening in Marawi city is going to incite more people to either support or reject caliphate, I would say I think looking at the response to what's happening in Syria with the ISIS, I think most people rejected the idea of using violence to achieve the objective of caliphate. Most people say, okay, caliphate is fine, but not by using violence, not by using terrorism. I think what's happening in Marawi city is the use of force and weapons, and I would say most people would not subscribe to the idea, except very few. I would say very few people who feels that Islamic State caliphate by any means, including violence and terrorism. So the answer to your question is very few people would be attracted to the idea of Islamic caliphate within this region.
Rungravi, I just want to extend the question to you. I mean, Andy makes the point, the notion of violence might not be an attractive, but the ideology may be attractive. And you've talked about, well, there is no hint of the BRN or the armed factions sort of being attracted to an ISIS narrative and joining forces. But what about the ideology of a caliphate? Just the people on the ground in Patani, Yala, does that have an appeal? And do you think what has happened in the Philippines might create this conversation?
I rarely hear the insurgents or the fighters, the liberation movement, whatever you want to call them, talking about the word caliphate. They use the word Islamic State. They say that after they gain independence, Merdeka, they want to create an Islamic State. And when I conduct my research, I also try to see if there is any linkages between this idea of creating independence and to build an Islamic State. They use the word Islamic State, they don't use the word caliphate. And also, the definition of Islamic State is varied. It doesn't mean that you have to implement hudud, which is, you cut arms of the people who steal things from other people. There are many interpretations of Islamic law. And some of them say that, they look for maybe Malaysia as a more moderate version of the implementation of Islam. And these always are contested issues within the Islamic community themselves. There are people who want Islamic law, and there are people who do not want Islamic law. Looking at Aceh as an example, after the autonomous area was created, and Islamic law has been in place in that area. And some Muslims do not like it. They do not want it, but some do. So these always are contested issues among the Muslims themselves as well. But it is the idea that, perhaps after they get an independence, this will be a heated debate.
Thank you. Next question.
Doug Sanders from Mahidol. Two specific questions. First for Phil. It's kind of a technical a question. Marawi seems to me to be a rather unlikely strategy just in terms of its geographical position. It's not isolated enough to really be capable of being held onto. It's not isolated enough. It's too big for the Philippines and the region to ignore and to allow. It's not Aceh, which is at the far end of something. You know, just was this. I can understand why Marawi was chosen in a sense, because apparently it's the most Muslim country, city in Mindanao. But it seems strategically, in the long run, indefensible. The second question is about patterning. The position of the Thai government for a number of years has been that they would not accept any strategy of devolution, autonomy, self-government. And this has been a major problem. These words cannot be uttered from Bangkok. Is there any shift in that, or does it remain a kind of irresolvable difference between the Thai government and the groupings in Patani? Thank you.
Phil, you want to take the geographic?
Yeah, I'll answer the geography one first. Yes, I totally agree with you in terms of defensibility of the city and holding the city. It's incomprehensible that they can expect to hold it for a sustained period of time. It's just militarily, they wouldn't have the resources like as what they have in Syria, for example, to do so. So the question begs, why now, and what's the objectives of doing so? And like I said earlier, I believe it's a rallying call. I believe it's an act of inspiration. They did pick it symbolically because it is the most Muslim city in Mindanao, or most Islamic city, sorry, in Mindanao. Did they expect to hold it for much longer than what they have? I think they're probably surprised that they've managed to hold it as long as they have held it. But it does give them the opportunity to consolidate a network that was unconsolidated before this. It's the first opportunity they've had to bring together their command, control, logistics, supply, everything in one organizational movement, as opposed to the disparate nature of what they had before. So it's as much of a test of their mettle themselves and their command and control, everything, than it is a statement. But as for holding it, no, I don't think they expect to hold it. It's really to inspire further support within the actual movement and create a momentum, essentially. So I hope that kind of addresses your question, which... a momentum based on failure. Is it a failure? They've held that city for 5 weeks now. Would you classify it as a failure in military terms? I wouldn't. Given it's a small force, it's relatively small force that is. It's hardly what I would classify as a military failure. It's a military failure on the part of the It's a military failure on the part of the AFP that they haven't dislodged them in 5 weeks. It's not a military failure on their part, and I'm not admiring what they're doing. I'm just recognising what they have actually achieved here. Yeah.
But holding territory, was that sufficient political capital being wasted in the process?
Well, I mean, holding territory in terms of the establishment of a caliphate is a prerequisite, it's a necessary. So, is there aspiration to create a physical caliphate? Unlikely in terms of the sustainability of that, but in terms of, again, back to the inspiration ideology aspect of it, yeah, it does actually give it much more momentum than what they had previously. But it's more about the organisational cohesion now that didn't exist prior to this.
Ravi, your question?
The issue of autonomy. So look at it in a positive way, at least we can talk about it. In 2004 to 2005, after the resurgence of violence, people even do not want to talk about it, because if you talk about autonomy, then the security force might keep an eye on that person. If you are Muslim in southern Thailand, they would not dare to talk about this in public, because if you're promoting this idea, then you will be deemed as, you might be supporting the insurgency. So in the past few years, at least, this become an issue that at least you can discuss it in a public forum. But to implement it, I think it's still a long shot. And I'm not very hopeful that if the military still in power and if it still continue to have dominant role after the elections, I think it is less likely that this idea will be seriously considered. Maybe, you know, this, the process to resolve the conflict in the South is perhaps linked to democratization in Thailand as well. You have to change things in Bangkok in order to resolve the problem in the South.
Thanks. Next question.
Yes, Oliver Langping. I work for Thailand Business News. So my question is for Phil Hines about the role of Malaysia in Islamic banking. I heard you were saying that Malaysia was the financial hub of support for ISIS. So could you be more specific about this? Do you have any information or report that shows facts about Malaysia's banking involvement in financing the ISIS movement?
How specific would you like me to be? How specific are you prepared for?
Well, just, I don't know, I was a bit surprised actually to hear this. So just what kind of do you have any bank name?
Well, do you understand the Islamic banking system to begin with?
Yes.
Do you understand it's not as controlled as the Western banking system?
Sure.
Therefore, it's much more flexible in terms of transferring money.
Yeah. So you don't have any...
oh, we do have, but I'm not entirely sure this is the right venue for me to get into specifics about certain governments financing money through the Islamic banking system, such as, I could spit it out, 2 countries in particular who have recently been implicated in financing deals through
Okay, we
Malaysia.
might discuss this maybe at another moment, but no, I would just, there isn't any official inquiries?
Oh, there are. There's a number of official inquiries. There's a number of bodies globally have been investigating the squirreling away of money via the Islamic banking system in Malaysia.
Okay.
And I can direct you to some very comprehensive documents on those investigations, but those are outside some of the source intelligence that we have actually been working on, which actually takes us back to countries like Turkey. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Andy, could I ask you, sort of extend the question to you about financing of the, IS in Indonesia? Is that something that the government has been looking at, or has that become part of the political conversation?
Well, not specifically the ISIS financing, but this whole thing about the financing of terrorism. We have laws already in place to monitor and actually to prevent the channeling of funds for terrorist purposes. And this came out not with ISIS, but with the Jamaah Islamiyah operation before, because they were getting money from overseas. So we already have this law in place. I'm not sure, like I said, ISIS operation is very small in Indonesia. These are local splinter groups that had been part of the Jamaah Islamiyah, and then they pledge allegiance to ISIS, basically not necessarily because they share the whole idea of the caliphate, but because by pledging allegiance, probably they get access to funding. But then the question is, how are they going to get the money? Again, that's not clear. But like the terrorist groups in the Philippines, they resort to crimes. Usually they would rob or gold shops, jewelry shops. Not in Jakarta, but outside Jakarta. There have been, we have had stories of jewelry shops being robbed, and then once the police discovered the perpetrators, they were able to link these groups with the terrorist groups. But at the moment, I think these are small-scale operations, and we have not seen any major ISIS operation in Indonesia, other than the lone wolves and the few groups that are simply just pledging their allegiance, but not necessarily directly taking instructions from ISIS in Syria.
Thank you. Next question.
Michael Mackey, freelance. Two questions for Phil, if I may. You mentioned that President Duterte had said, without a use of phrase, without evidence, that the Syrians were involved. Yet you yourself gave no evidence. And I wonder if you could just elaborate what the evidence, as you understand it, is. You don't have to give it away what's probably your company's intellectual property, but if we could just have a few broad brush strokes as to why specific commands are coming from what's left of the caliphate. The other thing goes back to one of the other questions that was asked, which is that this seems an unusual place for a group to be making an announcement about its arrival on the scene. And I was wondering if you had any idea as to why they hadn't gone for a big, high-profile event in a much larger centre, maybe even Manila itself. I noticed that Duterte had changed the security on the ports, and I was wondering if you felt there was likely to be any attack on the infrastructure within the Philippines.
Okay, taking the latter question first, and the reason why they choose here, again, it comes down to the fact that it is a recognized Islamic city in the country. For them to try and take something more further north, or even in the NPA's area of responsibility, or within the areas dominated by MLAF or MNLF, that would pitch them directly against those as well as the AFP. The fact that they even consider trying to do this somewhere like Manila, or launch a spectaculars are not ruled out. Spectaculars are not that difficult to actually put together, organize and execute. But something of this magnitude is obviously much more different in terms of its organization behind it. So, yeah, it's chosen for different reasons: geography, strategy, tactics. I mean, the area itself is constrained by geography, and the AFP's ability to operate there is constrained by geography. They have historically been fighting guerrilla campaigns in jungle environments. They've never really had to fight a urban conflict of this magnitude. So therefore, it's a shift in strategy for not just the militants, but in terms of how the AFP counter it. And it's been clearly demonstrated that the AFP's ability in what we call Fibia, fighting in built-up areas, is obviously lacking because they're still lodged in there. So that would be the reason for that. In terms of the pledges, the announcements from Syria, I mean, yes, we have the information that the President of the Philippines has announced. We have other information emanating from ASG itself, from Hapalon's faction, from the Motte group, where they have actually stated themselves, and within Islamist publications, that they are reacting to instructions from Syria. Again, I can dig up the links and send those links to you, so you have a reference point.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Peng, and best student at Pomona. So I was wondering, considering that the conflict of ISIS being able to grow from sectarian violence in Muslim majority states. So as we move towards Southeast Asia, where we find some Muslim majority states, but as well as Muslim minority states, for Thailand example, how does that, the rise of more radical Buddhists in Thailand, for example, affect the conversation that's going on surrounding, influences of the jihad coming in, or influences of creating an Islamic State?
Do you want to take that, Ravi? Because there's a reflection to radical Buddhists and fanning the flames. Yeah. Go ahead.
I addressed that a bit in my presentation as well. I think, this is still, as I said, a homegrown insurgency, and so far there have not been any evidence of the Islamic State operating in southern Thailand. I think that's...
No, but if it creates a chain effect, right? Radical non-Muslims in non-Muslim countries might respond, and as Phil was saying, that's exactly what IS wants, right? This kind of chain reaction. So, yeah. So, but at this stage, you don't see that's taking off in southern Thailand.
Yeah, I don't think that would have any major effects to the conflict in southern Thailand at this moment.
Okay, next question.
Willi Garmund, Berliner Zeitung. It's a question which concerns the south of Thailand and Indonesia. Saudi Arabia is hell-bent on promoting a very conservative form of Islam in Indonesia, in the south of Thailand and other parts. How far do you think that can be a door opener for more radicalized or more radical movements like IS in the future in Indonesia or like in the south of Thailand? And the second question is Bangladesh, which we haven't talked about so far. There has been this group in Myanmar which pretends to fight to defend the Rohingyas. And it became a little bit of a cause célèbre for radical Islamic movements in Asia. Do you think, what kind of impact do you think this is going to have? And can that, is ISIS making or trying to get its foothold in there? Can you separate it? Is it just Taliban kind of militancy, or what is it? Because the leader of that group apparently is based in Mecca.
Andy, could you take the first question? After all, the Saudi king was in your country a few months ago. Lavishing the first question was Saudi Arabia and Wahhabism and its influence. You hosted the king recently. He lavished your country.
Well, I think we have to distinguish between the Wahhabism and the radicalism and terrorism. I mean, the Wahhabism is a very strict, conservative ideology, if you like. And also it promotes intolerance towards other religions. But that's just one strain of Islam. And I have to admit it's actually spreading. It's spreading with the Saudi money as well. It's also developing in Indonesia. Like you mentioned, the Saudi king was in town a few months ago, and he actually pledged more money, not so much for the economic infrastructure, economic development. He pledged more money for the creation of more centers of learning Arabic. And usually with that center, they also bring the Wahhabi ideology. But as I would say that's the ideological battle in Indonesia among Muslims. It's not as if the Wahhabism is taking over. It's spreading, but I think it's still not the dominant strain of Islam in Indonesia. And there is a counter movement going on. And Indonesia being a democracy, this is all being freely debated and discussed. And people have a choice. They want to be, they want to subscribe to the more strict version of Islam or the more liberal. And this is exactly what's happening. It's a different thing from radicalism. I think radicalism is some people say, the Wahhabism is just one step away from radicalism. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I think people become radical for different reasons, not necessarily because of the ideology, but because they're not happy with certain things. And then from radicalism to terrorism, again, it's just one huge step. But in Indonesia, it's a democracy. People are debating, and people are making choices, and it's not a one-way, for the Wahhabism to take over and replace the other strains of Islam. We have a big conversation in Indonesia, and I will say that conservatism is now gaining ground, but it doesn't take us to become radical or terrorist. And I think the idea of an Islamic State in Indonesia is still so far. We have an election in 2019. That would be the test case whether the idea of Islamic State is popular or not. But looking at the elections in Indonesia, the last 4 elections of a democratic Indonesia, I'm talking about the elections after Suharto, the share of the Islamic parties that actually openly campaign for Islamic State and for the Sharia has been declining. So Indonesia may have becoming more and more conservative, But I think Indonesians do not subscribe to the idea of an Islamic State in Indonesia, and definitely not the idea of a caliphate, except for very, very small minority. And I suspect in 2019, when we have the next elections, I would say that the trend of the declining share of the Islamic parties will likely to continue.
Thanks. Phil, the question on Rohingya. Sorry, hang on a minute. Let Rung Ravi
answer the question on the Saudi money.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
In the context of southern Thailand, Saudi Arabia has been a major donors for the Wahhabi or Salafi movement in southern Thailand. And early on, when the violence surged, people point the finger at the Wahhabi, the Salafi movement in southern Thailand for being the mastermind behind the violence. But it turned out that the Wahhabi is actually not the group behind the violent insurgency. The insurgent in the south is actually not on good terms with the Wahhabi or the Salafi movement in the south. So this is a different scenario comparing to other violent conflict. Although the Saudi Arabia have given money to the Salafi movement in southern Thailand, the Salafi movement in southern Thailand has stressed on its peaceful, non-violence movement, and they focus their movement on education. So they have not entered that violent path. So that is kind of perhaps different from the context in other countries as well.
Thanks. Phil, the question on Rohingyas.
Yeah, well, I'll deal with your question on the Rohingyas. If you look at JMB as being a proxy of ISIS, the JMB was an organization in its own right for quite some time. In the last number of years, with the emergence of ISIS, JMB have seen an opportunity to align themselves with a broader Islamic message and ideology. If you look at the step down from that, then the Rohingya and how they've suffered over the decades, and their plight has been ignored by many regional governments in this part of the world, which has actually contributed to the resentment which is developing within that particular community. They're ripe for exploitation, they're ripe for recruitment, and JMB are exploiting those loopholes and weaknesses that these governments are not addressing the issue with the Rohingyas. And we now find that the Rohingyas are being recruited by JMB, so down around the Chittagong area, Chittagong hill tracts, we have an increasing number of Rohingyas being caught up with JMB activities. They're smuggling Rohingyas across Bangladesh into India, they're dispersing them from India to Saudi Arabia to different places to get them into Syria. It's a small amount of people at the moment, but unless that issue is addressed on the scale of the humanitarian abuse that's taking place, they will increase in terms of their numbers. It's just like the Uyghur issue. It's a direct comparison to the Uyghurs in China. The Uyghurs in China now constitute a significant element of support within Syria, but they're equally split between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But again, that network that's getting them from Western China via this country as a logistical hub, via Malaysia, via Brunei, via Philippines, then they jump off to, again, Saudi Arabia, they go directly to Turkey, they go to Iran, they do a land crossing. Yeah, it's all connected. And I'm using the Uyghurs as a comparative analysis, particularly to Willie's question, because it's much more advanced in terms of the developments with the integration of the Uyghurs within the ISIS and militant landscape than it is with the Rohingyas. But that's potentially where the Rohingya issue could go.
And the final question?
Kimiko Aoki from NHK World NPS. I have a question for Andy. It's a follow-up for what you were talking about. But I just wanted to ask the radical Islam, the presence being felt or seen on the media, especially recently in the Jakarta elections and such, including the conviction of the Jakarta governor. Is that more political push to use religion, or is there a religious push to use politics? I mean, I'm sure it's both, but what is the bigger element is what I wanted to ask you. Thank you.
Andy, that's for you.
Yeah, okay. like I said, there is growing religious conservatism in Indonesia, and I think that's fine, because that's, you know, it's a democracy, it's a debate, and all kinds of ideologies are coming in, and like the rest of the world, people are becoming more conservative, religiously conservative. Look at the United States, for example. Look at Europe. Indonesia is not, you know, it's not different. People are becoming more conservative and religiously more conservative. And I think this is, and then we have the elections, and you mentioned the Jakarta elections, and people are, the political parties, not political parties, conservative Islamic groups are using this, this trend of towards more conservatism, and they take advantage and exploit that for their, you know, for the objectives in this election, basically to deny the incumbent, who is a Christian and a Chinese descendant, to deny him the, you know, to get re-elected. And they were able, these conservative groups were able to manipulate public opinion. They use the social media very effectively, and many people subscribe to their campaign that non-Muslims, and the Chinese one at that, should not be elected to lead a city where the majority are Muslims. And of course, he lost the vote, the incumbent. So he got 43% of the vote in the runoff. And so, but I would say this is a one-off thing because of the election, because the presence of a Chinese and Christian candidate. Of course, the conservative groups, in collaboration with the Islamist parties, will work again and try this next year. In 2018, we have local elections again in more than 100 cities and regencies, and they look at what the successful campaign in Jakarta last month in April, and they believe that they can use that again in other elections. But it would be a different ball game, because in the other elections in other parts of Indonesia, religion would be not a big issue, because most likely in all this, like in Java, Central Java, East Java, and West Java, the elections, all the candidates were most likely to be Muslims and not Chinese or Christians. So this will become a non-issue. We have the national elections in 2019. Again, these people, these conservative groups who believe that Indonesia should become an Islamic State, they will work in collaboration with the Islamist parties to further their objectives. We'll have to see whether how far they're going to get. But like I said, looking at the previous elections, most Muslims in Indonesia don't subscribe to the idea of Islamic State, and they don't feel comfortable about the Sharia either. We have the Sharia in place in Aceh, for example. That's a historical mistake, but it's there, and I think most people in the rest of Indonesia, they say that's not really where they want to go. So I feel quite confident that what happened in Jakarta in April is specific because the candidate is Christian and Chinese, and of course one criticism against him because he was just arrogant, he had a big mouth, and that also worked against his re-election chances. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality.
Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking all three speakers for keeping you all enlightened and informed and insightful. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Andy, in Jakarta.
Thank you, guys.
Phil and Ravi, thanks for that.